We have bought into the idea that meek means weak, having a sword but leaving it sheathed until you need it, knowing how to use the sword but not just pulling it out in every situation. That's what meekness is. If you are weak and incapable of violence, you are not virtuous, you are useless as a man. That's why you should train jujitsu. That's why you should train with blades and with firearms and different things like that, because if the imago Dei, if the image of God is being violated, one of his image bearers is being violated in that moment, guess what? You don't have time for. You don't have time for a Bible study. You don't have time for a prayer circle. You have time to act.
Kyle, good to see you, brother. It's been a long time. I figured we'd run it back. I was on your podcast. Who knows how long ago? It all kind of blends together at this point.
It was a long time ago, but hey, we finally made it happen. I know both of our schedules, it's like two ships passing in the night, but we finally made it happen.
You're a busy man. It sounds like you've got some credit card processing issues right now. I'd actually like to talk about that because this assault, I don't know if you'd call it that, but I say it's an assault on free speech. And, businesses are free to do what they want. And I think they can decide who they want to do business with. An unpopular opinion is even companies that decide they want to discriminate based on immutable characteristics is something that I think should be allowed. That's not a popular opinion, but I'm not saying I advocate for it, but those businesses will bury themselves. But I am curious what you're going through, because I think this is a very real threat when it comes to the concept of free speech.
Yeah, well, Ryan, let me just echo your sentiment there. I think businesses should be allowed to discriminate against people. So if you put a sign on your door that says, "We do not serve Asians," and it's Monday, you should be out of business by tomorrow, right? And so you should have
probably maybe not against Asians though.
Right. Well, I use them as an example because they're not the lightning rod that a lot of other groups are. But if you picked a group that has immutable characteristics that they can't change, and you say, we're not going to serve these people, you should have the right to run your business into the ground. Okay. But as entrepreneurs, Ryan, and you understand this as well, we're always going to run into issues. There's always going to be things that come up, and we don't have a staff of 1,000 people to just like dump our problems onto. A lot of times, especially if you're a solopreneur, you just have to deal with it. But what we're going through right now, and we're in the final stages, and I have to be kind of cagey in how we talk about it. But roughly a month ago, I get an email from our credit card processor that says, we're deleting your account. You have 30 days to find a new processor. So I'm in the middle of I have 10 meetings that day or something like that. And so I'm like, this is nonsense. This had to have been some sort of AI generated thing, or maybe some low level staffer made a mistake. So I just email back and say, hey, I think there was some sort of mistake. Nothing has changed in terms of how we've processed. Nothing in our business has changed. And they're like, no, this is for real. And so I put in a review, like, hey, let's get a review. It's rejected, Ryan. And if you've ever experienced this on YouTube, you get the rejection letter in less time than it takes to somebody to actually review the video, right? So it was like that type of rejection. And so they're like, well, you violated our terms of service. I was like, okay, tell me where in the terms of service we violated. They wouldn't tell us. They just kept sending us a link to the terms of service. I'm like, got it. Got the link. I got it in the last 2 emails. What line? What page are you on, and what did we violate specifically? And they wouldn't tell us. I was like, hey, I just need to get on the phone with somebody. I think there's got to be some sort of mistake that's happened. Let me just get on the phone with somebody. They refused. They would not get on the phone. They're like, we've done your review. It's been manually reviewed, and the decision stands. And so I'm trying to get something out of these emails back and forth, Ryan. And basically the last email they sent me was, look, we think you need to be with a company that's more aligned with you, that, shares your values and will help you and your company grow and blah, blah. And I was like, oh, okay. Now it makes a whole lot more sense. So what very likely happened, if I were to guess, if I were to, put the house on it, bet the house on it, some low-level staffer with, purple hair and a nose ring saw some of the things that we were saying during Pride Month about how, Pride's an abomination and, all these different sinful behaviors. And we say all kinds of crazy stuff on our show. Like, we shouldn't kill babies when they're in the womb. 14-year-old girls shouldn't have their breasts removed because they're, gender confused. We say crazy stuff like that. So I'm sure some staffer.
This is absolutely crazy, things you're saying here.
Yeah. And so I'm sure some staffer saw that, didn't appreciate it, and they put us on a list. And we weren't doing massive numbers on there, but that is where all of our donations go through, Ryan. And so the main reason, I say this all the time on the show, the main reason why Undaunted Life's even a thing is because we have donors. We have guys like you and I that are giving $10 a month, $25 a month, $50 a month because they like the content and they want to see it continue. Well, this credit card processor processes every single one of those donations. And just like that, they could turn it off. Now, they thought they were doing me a favor because it's like, oh, we'll give you 30 days. But then they're in charge of all the vaulted information, which is the credit card information, which is the most important stuff. And so if the new company I go to can't take that vaulted information and transfer it directly over, you know what happens? Second hardest thing to do is to get someone to sign up to be a monthly donor. First hardest thing to do is to get them to re-sign up to be a monthly donor, right?
Right. Sign them up twice.
Yeah. And so it's like, oh, hey, can you go to this new website and set up a new account so that you can give me money for my benefit only? And so, you know, that's the long and short of the situation we're going through. But to your larger point, Ryan, there is a movement.
Before you get to that, Kyle, get to that, do you mind if I ask what, I know you're trying to be a little bit, and I get it. You're trying to be strategic, be intelligent. I get all that. I understand. Can you tell us the credit card processor? Is that something you're comfortable telling us? Because I think it's important we know that.
I'll tell you offline. As of right now, the sense I get is this company is fairly litigious because the people I've talked to in the credit card space, like there are credit card companies out there that you would know that they're like, oh yeah, these people have a huge reputation for canceling people. This company, all the people I said, they're like, oh, I'd never heard of this company doing that. And so I'll tell you offline, as of right now, since we're right in the thick of it, we haven't transferred over all vaulted information yet. So
Fair
if
enough.
we start saying things publicly, then the last thing I need for them is to make my life even harder.
Yeah, and I don't want to do that to you. Obviously, you know, I think it's important we all are aware of this, but I wouldn't want to do that to you. You know, if I don't know if you're looking at other card processors or anything like that right now. I'm sure you are. You should look into a program called Apogee Pay. That's by a good friend of mine, Matt Boudreau and Ryan King. They're doing phenomenal stuff.
Yeah, I was just on Matt's show not long ago.
Oh yeah, did you guys talk about it at all?
We didn't talk about this at all. I didn't know that was the thing that Apogee was doing.
Yeah. So what they do is they actually take a portion of the processing fees, because you're going to pay fees whether you're with them or any other organization. That makes sense. But they take a portion of those processing fees and they apply it directly to these organizations like Apogee and other organizations that guys like you and I believe in. So if I'm going to pay fees, and I am, and I don't have a problem with fees, they're businesses. Yep. I've got a business, I've got fees, they've got a business, they've got fees. But if I know my money is going towards something I believe in and something that I think is going to move the needle of the country in the right direction, I'm good with that. I can swallow that at night.
Yeah, we're in the final stages with a couple of different companies that have a similar model to that. But the overall thing, guys, is, you know, we always talk about, oh, people are getting canceled on social media and blah, blah. Well, look, if you're a private citizen and someone turns off your Twitter account or something like that, that really sucks. And that is tamping down your free speech. But what they want to do is they want to take out business owners. They want to take out people that employ other people. They want to take out content creators, because if you're putting out a counter narrative to the accepted narrative, whether it's on any subject, whether it's, you know, the C word from 2020 or BLM or any of these types of things, if you go counter to the narrative that is accepted, they will do what they can to crush you. And they can use things like the federal government, like the IRS. They can use the, you know, small business bureaus, even in your city, to try and make your life a living hell. And the thing is, you know, we constantly talk about resilience and being resilient in the face of these challenges. But even as Christians, it's like we should expect these things to come. Not everything is persecution. If someone leaves a negative comment on your YouTube channel because they don't like the fact that you say the word Jesus, that's not persecution. This is, though. This is them trying to shut down a dissenting opinion that doesn't go with the accepted orthodoxy of the LGBTQ plus lobby or just leftism in general.
I'm glad that you said that not everything's persecution, because we do live in a culture where everybody feels victimized. Everybody feels burdened with, you know, some sort of victimization. Somebody's out to get them. There's always a villain. There's always a victim. I don't think that's the case. You know, you and I might get on this podcast and disagree with a few things. I actually had a really, I would say, sharp disagreement and discussion with somebody I really respect and admire. And I think she respects and admires what we're doing here. We vehemently disagreed on some things that I shared. I sent her a private message on Instagram. We had a really quick discussion. I said, hey, here's my number. Like, shoot me a text. So she sent me a text. We had a little discussion. I'm like, hey, let's jump on a phone call this week. You know, I know that we're not going to agree. There's two topics in particular: feminism and the concept of vulnerability. Those two topics specifically, her and I are not going to agree on, but we can have a discussion about it. And I think that's one of the biggest breakdowns in society today, is that she's not my enemy. The people who disagree with me are not my enemies, but there are enemies, and we need to be able to differentiate between the two. Somebody saying something mean about you or mean to you, they're not necessarily your enemy. They just might disagree. But there are people who are bad actors doing bad things, and they're deliberately and intentionally trying to sabotage our efforts.
I mean, that's absolutely true. And I think that you're on a really good point here, because I tell people on my show all the time, if you disagree with my opinion about something or the way that I've expressed my opinion, I'm just going to tell you, if you send me a long email telling me about how my opinion is wrong, I'm not going to take that seriously. I'm not going to take advice from or critique from someone I wouldn't take advice from. But if I'm ever factually inaccurate about something, if I've said something that isn't actually true, please correct the record. It's incumbent upon you as my follower to correct the record on something like that. But we should be able to agree to disagree on a myriad of subjects. The problem is that as I see people taking the good advice that you just gave them to the opposite extreme, and they add an 11th commandment, which is thou shalt be nice. And we're like, okay, agree to disagree on abortion. It's like, actually, no, we're not going to agree to disagree on abortion, because that is a human being that is alive that deserves our protection. And so we can disagree on policy, and we can disagree on how it's, figured out on a state level or federal level or things like that. But no, we're not going to agree to disagree on whether or not that is a biologically separate entity than the mother that it is inside of. And I feel like we cede way too much ground to people on these subject matters because we're scared of the kerfuffle. We're scared of getting into a problem with people because we assume that every problem is going to go to level 10. But it's like we need to practice sitting in front of people that have a strong disagreement with us, and both of us trying to keep our heart rates down and our blood pressure low, and just figuring out where that goes. But eventually you do have to come to bedrock. There's the one particular friend in mind that is probably similar to this gal with you. He and I disagree about everything except for a handful of bands and a handful of movies. But we love sitting together, having a cigar and a whiskey, and talking through the things we disagree on. Like, he's an atheist, I'm a Christian. Like, he thinks prog rock is good, and I think metalcore is the best ever. Like, and we just kind of go back and forth. But he and I have probably debated 5 or 6 hours on abortion. Just him and I, eyeball to eyeball. And we both can leave those conversations going, hey man, love you, have a good rest of your day, tell your wife I said hello. As opposed to what we see on social media and these man on the street interviews where it's people like literally almost coming to fisticuffs over a subject matter that is incredibly important. But it's like, if you can't elucidate it in a way that can change a heart, that can logically destroy an argument, it's like, dude, you're just making noise. That's enough.
I'm writing this down. You said changing hearts. I actually like that because, I get into the weeds and, it's hard not to, especially on social media. But when you're talking about changing hearts and changing your opinions, you're not going to be able to do that if you're just bickering at each other and bitching and moaning and griping about your grievances. No. The other thing I wrote down here, Kyle, is this concept of tolerance and acceptance. People use those terms synonymously.
Yeah.
They're not synonymous. I can tolerate a lot of things that I don't need to accept. The other one that comes to mind is compromise. Oh, we need to compromise. Sure. We can compromise on some things, but there's some things I'm not interested in compromising with you on. And the thing that I hear a lot from people, this is actually something that you hear in conservative circles. We need to come together as a country. Bro, there's things I'm not interested in coming together on. So, I can appreciate the quote unquote concept of solidarity. I can appreciate the concept of being nice and being kind and acquiescing to people's wishes and desires and things like that. I can appreciate some of that. But there's some things I'm not interested in unifying on. And I see that a lot in society today where everybody's like, just be nice, be kind, get along. That has taken us in a horrible, horrible direction. It's only going to get worse.
Well, you said it about conservatives. Here's what conservatives have done for a long time. It's like they just keep getting backed up and backed up and backed up and backed up. And then finally they get their back against the wall. They're like, hey, now, don't you push me anymore, see, because you don't want to see me when I'm angry, see? And then they just keep getting pushed back. And what conservatives, and I'll even lump in Christian conservatives, have done is one day they will wake up, the war will be over, and they will realize that they never picked up their shield, they never picked up their sword, and they never got in the fight because they never found a hill that was worth dying on, right? Because they've accepted the 11th commandment, thou shalt be nice. Also, they've bought the cultural lie that tolerance is a biblical value. Because you will have non-Christians scream in the faces of Christians and say, well, why don't you just be tolerant? Aren't you supposed to be loving? It's like, yes, I am called to be loving, but I'm not called to tolerate sinful behavior. When you look at Jesus of Nazareth and see, his life depicted in the books of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you do not see the tolerance of sin. You see him talking to the heart and speaking to the heart of the sinner, but also telling them to go and sin no more. It wasn't like, hey, woman at the well who's, shacking up with a dude who's been married a bunch of different times. She's an adulterer. She's all these different things. He didn't say, you know what? I love you regardless of your decisions. Go and have a good rest of your day. It was like, I don't condemn you, but also go and sin no more. Like there is something that we need to do. Because here's the other thing that these people, when you talk about compromise, I love the fact that you brought that up. And this is why. What is the middle position on cutting off the healthy breast tissue of a 13-year-old girl that's gender confused? What is the compromise position? Exactly. Right. And so it's like, oh, do I just cut off part of her breasts? Do I just give her partial, these hormones? Do I give these little boys just part of the hormones? Are we going to legislate the exact amount that are injected into their bodies that stop their puberty and healthy development as a young boy or young girl? What exactly is the middle position? There are middle positions on a lot of different issues. Immigration, tax policy, foreign policy. I'm sure there are middle, compromising positions, but there are things that we just cannot go along to get along on. And so many Christians, because they're pussies, because they're worried about being called out for being bigoted, they will say things like, I want to be known for what I'm for, not what I'm against. Well, look, dummy, when you communicate that you're for something, you're communicating that you're against other things, because that's how words work. And so when we're talking about these huge topics, like specifically transgenderism, especially in children, and abortion and all these other topics, there are certain things that we cannot compromise on. So this idea of kumbaya and let's all get around, like even Jesus said, like he was coming to divide families. Like there would be brother against brother and let the dead bury their dead. There's so many different things that he said that was so incendiary and so exclusive, Ryan. And we just think about Jesus as this hippie that just included everybody and put his arms around everybody. And hey, I'm going to love you no matter what. Well, guess what? God doesn't need to send himself in the form of his son down to earth to die, to pay for our sin debt if he just accepted us the way that we are. It's nonsense.
Yeah, the other thing that comes to mind as you're talking about this concept of being judgmental. You'll hear a lot of Christians and conservatives say, well, we shouldn't be judgmental. I don't actually agree with that. I think maybe judgmental is not the right word, but discerning. If somebody's engaged in a behavior that I think is not conducive to themselves or other people, we ought to exercise some level of discernment or judgment, use the word you want, to say that I'm not judging the person, I'm judging the behavior. And that's, from a Christian perspective, that's what Jesus would teach. Hate the sin, not the sinner, right? So I can have an intolerance for certain behavior, but still really care about the individual. Even in myself, there's certain behaviors that I engage in and I have in the past that I don't consider healthy or beneficial for myself or other people. I don't hate myself. Sure. But damn if I don't try to improve and eliminate those temptations and those vices and the things that aren't serving me in some way. Call it judgment, call it discernment, call it whatever you want. But it's not a free pass to let people do whatever they want, especially when it's going to impact, in the case of transgenderism, children that can't defend themselves and can't make decisions for themselves, or impact other people like ourselves and the people we have a responsibility to care for.
Well, you say judgment, you say discernment, but also it's because we've lost the thread on what the word love means. So I use this example a lot, but there was a good buddy of mine who his two best friends growing up ended up becoming gay for each other, right? And my buddy came to me, this was, 10 years ago, and he's like, hey man, I know my buddies are going to eventually want to get married, right? Once everything's legalized here in Oklahoma and all that kind of stuff, I know they're going to want to get married and they're going to ask me to be a part of it. Like either like a best man or like, I don't know how they're going to do it, but they're going to ask me to be a part of it. What should I do? And I said, well, you can't as a believer go to a ceremony that is celebrating something that God calls abominable. You can't do that. But I have an idea for you. How about you and your wife be the first family to host them for dinner after they get back from whatever honeymoon that they take? And you bring them into your house and you show them the love of Christ and you love on that couple, right? Because, some people will acquiesce and say, even Alistair Begg came out recently and said, yeah, not only am I going to go to the gay wedding, I'm going to buy him a present. It's like, well, no, you can't go, because a wedding is not a private affair. It is a public affair. It is a public declaration of a
By
commitment
design.
that you're making
Sure.
by design, which is the closest thing that human beings on this earth have to understanding God's love, because God gave us his son to pay for our sin debt, right? And Jesus laid down his life for the church. As men, we are called to lay down our lives for our brides. Jesus' bride was the church. Our brides are our brides. So as a man, it's the closest thing. It's the closest thing we get to understanding Jesus' love and Jesus' sacrifice for us. So of course, everything that God creates, Satan counterfeits, right? So you have, true intimacy inside of a marriage covenant between one man and one woman for life. And then you have porn and homosexuality and multiple relationships and all this sexual brokenness over here that Satan's going to counterfeit and try to tell you that it's okay and morally acceptable. But that's what I told my friend to do. It's like, look, in this moment, we are called, Paul tells us in one of his letters, we are called to judge other Christians. But if people are non-Christians, that's an evangelism conversation, brother. Like, this isn't where you pull out the 10 Commandments and start saying, yeah, this is where you went wrong. It's like, we are told who to judge. We are to judge the people that are inside of the church, the people that are outside the church, the people that are non-Christians. You need to talk to them about Christ and how they need him, or else they have no chance after this life is over. And so, again, yeah, discernment, fine. I'm with you. I'm with you on that. We discern all the time. We go left as opposed to right. We go to this restaurant as opposed to that one. We take this route because that guy looks a little funny over there. We always do that. But it's this rotting away of what love actually means. Well, guess what? If you truly love someone, you're not going to allow them to continue doing something that is going to destroy them. I talk about kids all the time. If you're not a yeller and you've dedicated yourself because your dad yelled and everybody yelled and it made you feel funny, that you're never going to yell at your kids, but you see your kid taking off running towards the street and there's heavy traffic, in that moment, are you going to hang on to that, well, I'm just not going to yell at my kid because when I yell, they're going to cry? Or are you going to do whatever it takes to stop them from doing something that will destroy them? It's the same thing with love.
I'm glad that you're talking about that, because there's this idea of like reading the room, right? I think that's where these black and white measures of I'm never going to yell, for example, or this is how I talk to people, and if they don't like it, that's their problem. I'm like, you're a man, you're capable of understanding what the situation calls for. And we may not always be great at our delivery or communication or articulating ideas, but damn if you can't see what somebody else is dealing with and approach it, like you said, in love. That doesn't mean that you need to be soft, and it doesn't mean you need to be a hard ass. It means that you need to see what they're going through, read the room a little bit, and then ultimately serve that individual in a way they need to be served.
Well, there's a time when an axe is appropriate and there's a time when an axe is destructive, right? And same thing with a scalpel. There's a time where you need the axe. So I literally have this on the background of my phone, and so I'll show it to you. It says, I don't know if you can see it, but it says, lion for them, lamb with them. Lion for them, lamb with them. I made that. And the reason is because children, or you can use your household. So that's, wife and your children. So I've got 2 boys and my spouse. If all they ever see is lamb and they never see the lion and they don't think the lion is even available, they're going to be insecure, because they know if a wolf comes to try to destroy them or take from them, and all they've ever seen is lamb, docile, and all that, and they don't think the lion's available, they're going to be really, really terrified if something pops off and gets kinetic, right? But then, if you're always lion, and they only ever see lion, they're terrified, right? They're terrified of making dad mad. They're terrified of triggering dad again, or making a noise when dad, didn't want a noise to be made and all that, and all they ever see is lion. That's a problem as well. So the perfect thing right there in the middle, I didn't come up with this, some pastor did, I can't remember, but like the perfect thing is where you are lamb with them, but they know the lion is available, right? That is the definition of meekness. So when you hear the scripture about the meek shall inherit the earth, we have bought into the idea that meek means weak. And a lot of people have talked about this. I'm certainly not, talking about it for the first time. Jordan Peterson's talked about it, a bunch of different pastors. The actual root word of what's being described there in meekness is closer to having a sword, but leaving it sheathed until you need it. Knowing how to use the sword, but not just pulling it out in every situation. That's what meekness is. If you are weak and incapable of violence, you are not virtuous. You are useless as a man. You are absolutely useless as a man. That's why you should train jujitsu. That's why you should train with blades and with firearms and different things like that. Because if the imago Dei, if the image of God is being violated, one of his image bearers is being violated in that moment, guess what? You don't have time for. You don't have time for a Bible study. You don't have time for a prayer circle. You have time to act. I talk about this quite a bit. A couple of years back, there was a woman that was being raped on a train car in Philadelphia. Okay? Woman's being violently penetrated by an absolutely horrific piece of human debris. When the police show up after the act had been consummated, I guess you could call it, a bunch of people walked up to the police officers with their phones and said, hey, I have video of the attack. Wait, well, you have video? You were on the car when this was happening? Yes. There were a bunch of men and women, but there were a bunch of men that took video of the attack as opposed to interceding. Because these men, maybe they had been convinced that if they had acted out physically, that was bad because their fifth grade teacher told them that violence is wrong no matter what the circumstances. Maybe they've been convinced that, no matter what, shows of machismo or aggression, that's toxic masculinity and we shouldn't do those things. And so this is part of the problem that we run into is when we're downstream of what feminist culture or leftist culture is telling us to do, it has real world consequences for actual people because we're not ready and raring to go because, again, we think the meek shall inherit the earth, so I just need to navel gaze and never really tell anyone what I want to have happen. It's a problem.
Well, I mean, this is the issue. The scenario you just gave us is the same issue that we see with a gentleman by the name of Daniel Penny, former military member who was being threatened, not only him, but other passengers in a subway, I believe it was. Don't quote me on that. I might not be correct.
Subway in New York City.
Right. And so this guy was threatening other people. He stepped up, stepped into action, subdued the individual, ended up killing him. That's unfortunate. And I think he would probably say that as well. Didn't intend to, by what I've seen anyways. I don't have all the information. Yep. And here he is being convicted with, I don't know if it's murder or manslaughter, but this is exactly what you're talking about. You've got a guy who's actually stepping up to be a man, to exercise discernment. He's using his skill set to neutralize a potential threat. And here we are as a culture throwing him under the bus, throwing him to the wolves, and saying that he's quote unquote toxic. And it's it really does call into question. I see this a lot, actually, and I want to ask you about this. You see this on social media a lot where guys will, say, hey, with regards to feminism, for example, we'll say, well, this is what they wanted, so this is what they get. And I can agree with that argument. It's like, yep, I see where you're coming from. And I also believe that we as men have an obligation, responsibility. One thing that comes to mind, for example, is women being, and I don't know if this hasn't passed yet, but it's been introduced, a law that essentially automatically enrolls women into selective service, or AKA the draft.
Yep.
As a culture, as a society that allows its women to do its fighting for them, that's a broken, lost, degenerate culture. And also, this is what people wanted. So here are the results.
Yeah, you wanted it and you're getting it good and hard. And so, just this morning, I saw a couple of different things. One, I think this was over in the UK. There was a woman that was being sexually assaulted. She fought off her attacker by using pepper spray. She was arrested because she was walking around with a weapon because pepper spray in this jurisdiction was considered to be a weapon. It's like, okay. I saw another video of two female cops trying to subdue a normal-sized American male. And this video went on for minutes and minutes and minutes, and they can't cuff this guy. And this guy, he was probably drunk or high or something. You could just tell he was kind of glazed over in his eyes, and they couldn't subdue this guy. What if that guy had murderous intent? What if there was a playground nearby with a bunch of families and children walking around, and he was trying to shed as much blood as possible? And you have these two female cops, and again, this is where we're getting into all these terrible subject matters. But it's no, women should not be in combat roles in the military. That should not happen. Well, if you're a cop, you're always in a combat role, right? So if you're, and this goes to the big gutted, male cops that don't take care of themselves and couldn't chase down a perpetrator if they needed to. You have all these people that are going around trying to protect individuals, but they're not able to even protect themselves. And we're just supposed to sit by as these men that are a little bit more sheepdoggish in our disposition and in our training, and we're supposed to just acquiesce to you. We're going to allow the government to take care of us. We're just going to outsource our protection and our safety to you. I'm like, I'm sorry, because every June, I see the Marine Corps not talking about how lethal they can be in a conflict. I see them talking about how accepting they are of the LGBTQ plus identity folks, and how diverse the military is becoming, and all these different things. And diversity in and of itself is not problematic, but it's not in and of itself virtuous either, because I don't care what the military looks like. If they all end up looking the same, but they're really, really good at killing people and breaking stuff, that's what I need the military to be good at. They don't need to be good at, checking off the cultural boxes that make people in, the Upper West Side of New York feel better. It's just one of those things that for us, we have to choose whether or not we're going to acquiesce to what the government and what these individualistic structures are telling us to do, or if we're going to take care of business on our own.
Well, so the question that naturally comes up when we talk about these things, and I've heard people ask me this, and this is valid, is like, okay, great. I agree with what you're saying. I think everybody listening here probably would, for the most part. They probably listen to me because they agree with largely what I have to say. So we're all on the same page. So what do we do about it? That's the $1 million question right there. Got it. Check. We agree. Now what?
So it starts at the individual level. Like, this is going to be a whole bunch of crap that you guys have heard before, but just listen in. It'll be a nice reminder for you. You can control the controllables, because what I can't control is to the T what all of my elected officials in my municipality, or the people that I can, cast a ballot for, what they do. I can't completely control everything that they do. So Mark Wayne Mullins, senator from the state of Oklahoma, represents us in the United States Senate. He and I are on a, text basis and all those types of things. Well, guess what? He's voted some ways that I didn't really appreciate, but I still voted for him. But I can only control me. I can have direct influence over my spouse and my 2 young boys, but I can only control me. And so if you are not equipped to be able to push back darkness individually on a spiritual, mental, or physical level, that is deeply problematic. It's kind of like the Jordan Peterson thing. It's like, why are you concerned so much about what's happening in society when your room is so dirty? It's like, clean your room, like make your bed, like take care of your world, provide dominion over the areas where you have influence, and then allow it to work out from there. But Ryan, we could go into a lot of different things. It's how we catechize our children. It's how we raise up our children. We raise up our girls to look for strong men to take care of them. This idea that girls need to be independent, it's foolish. They don't need to be independent. They need to be dependent on a male that is providing headship over their household to our young sons, that they would grow up into these men that can protect, provide, and preside, and that they can do all these different things that they should be trained to do, that the society and the public schools are not going to teach them outright. Those are the things that we can handle. And get a bunch of dudes like that around you. Get a bunch of dudes that are like cultivating spiritual, mental, and physical resilience on a daily basis, because that will have a tremendous impact on your household, on your neighborhood, on your congregation, on your city. And again, it does overflow into a culture that is sick right now. The American culture, the West, is on life support. And it's only going to happen not from, electing the right guy in November, or not, getting, the House and the Senate and, taking care of all this. It starts with us, guys. If we're not taking care of it, it doesn't matter if Trump or Biden wins.
Well, I like that. That's ultimately like puts the ball in your court. It's hard though, because a lot of guys are like, oh, that's not enough, right? It's like, well, it may not be with you alone, and I'll admit that, but if we can get hundreds of thousands or millions of men to buy into the idea that you take care of yourself physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, like you're talking about, then what we can do is we can start running for office, and we can start sitting on our school boards and our HOA boards and our city council boards, and we can start running for mayor and governors and representatives and senators. Like, I think the solution is that men like us need to start getting more political, but there's so many men, and I get it. I fully understand it, who are like, why would I do that? I've had the same questions. Why in the world would I do that? And, on the back of 4th of July here in the U.S., I'm assuming that our founding fathers probably wrestled with the same notion. Why would I do that? I'm rich, I'm wealthy, I've got lands, I've got titles, I've got this, I've got that, I've got a life. Why in the world would I do that? And yet they did. So it's like we got to get more of us involved in the political realm, even though I know how many of us do not want to get involved in the political realm.
Well, the men that signed the bottom of the Declaration of Independence, they knew what they were signing. They were signing their death warrant. They knew that from the beginning. And you're right. These people did have titles. They had property. They had people. They had all kinds of stuff, everything that you could want in the 1700s, right? And they had it all. But there was something that they wanted more than that, which was liberty and freedom. So we've lived downstream of their sacrifice for over 200 years, coming up on, a quarter of a millennium. And it's that same poem. It's like, hard times make strong men make good times make weak men make hard times. That's where we're at right now. We're all fat, we're all happy, and we're all technically satisfied. We might be in a little bit of a Twitter spat with this person over here. We might be a little bit disappointed in how our life is going over there, but guess what? There's no hordes of barbarians coming over the hill trying to take our women and cattle. And so we just basically get to operate as if we're insulated because we think that we are. And it's only in a culture like that, excuse me, where you are worrying about things that aren't. Think about this. In the early days of COVID, before we knew really what it was, before we knew who it was going to target and how these people, the survivability and all that, we didn't hear a whole lot about Black Lives Matter. We didn't hear a whole lot about transgenderism. We didn't hear a whole lot about pronoun hospitality. Why? Because we had an existential threat that was a virus that we couldn't see. Go also to September the 12th of 2001, the day after the 9/11 attacks. People weren't terribly concerned about their own problems. We were all galvanized as a country against this evil, which was fundamentalist Islam. And we just don't have that fight right now, Ryan. Like, we think it's the election, but it's not really the election. We think it's, maybe it's Ukraine and Russia. We think that's it, but that's not it either. But there's a rot that is coming from the very basis of our culture. And it's coming downstream of communism and these ideals that have come over. They're like, okay, we can't attack America from the left or the right because they got oceans on either side, and then they've got people in the north and the south that are basically okay with them. So we're going to try to rot away the culture from the inside. And I got to tell you, it's worked like a charm.
Yeah, I mean, you're totally right. And look, one thing that you had talked about is even just knowing who your representatives and your congressmen are. You talked about the individual who's representing you, and it's like, you know who that person is. You're on text basis with them. How many of us could name our senators and our representatives? Probably not many. And it's crucial that we start to get involved in more meaningful and significant ways. Otherwise, you're going to allow other people to dictate your life. I mean, you wouldn't do that at home. You wouldn't let your children dictate how you run your home. Even at work, you're not going to for the most part, you're not going to let other people dictate the way that you do things. If you're an employee, you still have boundaries. But unless you know the game and you're willing to get involved in the game, like, there's nothing that you can do about it. So this is something I lean more and more heavily towards because I know how important it is that we get involved and don't let other people who do not want the best for us having their say and speaking on our behalf.
Yeah, I'll briefly elucidate that even a little bit further. Like when the lockdowns and all that were going on here a few years ago, it wasn't the federal stuff that was bothering you as much. It was the local stuff. But people found out good and fast. They had no idea who their mayor was. They had no idea who the sheriff was. They had no idea who the school board was. They had no idea who any of these people were. And it's like, wait a minute, what are y'all showing my kids in 6th grade? What books are y'all allowing in the libraries at my kids? Wait, what? It's like, you don't know any of these people. And so they were operating basically via fiat. They could do whatever they wanted, and they went unchecked. And so, look, I know it's a lot harder to be involved locally, seemingly, because you can't just open up your Twitter account and know exactly what the mayor of your town is probably thinking that day. But you can have a tremendous impact on those people. You can be on a first name basis. Because if you're walking into the mayor's office and he's extending his hand to introduce himself, consider yourself behind. He should be shaking your hand, or she should be shaking your hand and saying, good to see you again, right? because you should be a concerned and involved citizen. The same goes with your church. You want to see things change at your church, maybe some other issues. Does the pastor know your name? Right? Whether it's a small congregation or a large one, doesn't matter. Does the pastor know who you are? Are you consequential to them? Like, think about it. For some of your younger listeners, right? I go back to college. So there was one particular class. It was the hardest class in our degree program. You knew that before you even got into the program. There were 3 things you did in that class. There was a midterm, a final, and a paper. That was it. Did not do well in the midterm. I crushed the paper. Mathematically, I could not get a high enough grade on the final to get an A in the class. But I had sat in the front row. I'd gone to every single class except for one class because I was out of the country. And I go in the week of finals and I talk to this professor and I say, hey, I understand. I worked my butt off for the midterm. It just didn't work out for me. I know I can't mathematically get an A in the class, but I want to do my best to earn it. What can you do for me? And he didn't say, sorry, what was your name again? Which class is it? He said, okay, Kyle, if you can get an A on my final, I'll give you an A in my class. Right? So I got an A on the final. I got an A in the class. That may seem like a small example, but it's because he knew me, Ryan. It's because he knew that I was busting my butt all semester. I just had a bad test day on the midterm, right? It wasn't from lack of preparation. It was from lack of, follow through, I guess you could say. But we don't treat our local municipalities that way. We don't treat the elder board at our church that way. And then we're shocked when things don't go the way that we want it to. It's like, well, you're not influencing anybody in the direction that you want to influence them in. That's on you.
I actually saw a study the other day where they were talking about out of the big 5 personality traits, and I can't remember exactly what they are, but Jordan Peterson talks a lot about this. But one of them is agreeableness, and in the study it suggested that people who were more agreeable got better grades in college exams. Of course they did. Of course. Because if a professor likes you, knows a little bit about your own personal story, your dynamic, of course you're going to get a better grade. If you take 2 people that are equally, qualified, and one person knows one and doesn't know the other, the one person that's known is going to get the opportunity. The same thing you're talking about with work is, I just call it initiative. How many people are so passive, especially men, who are like, oh, I got passed over for the promotion again because it's all politics. Well, damn, brother, if you understand it's all politics and you're not playing the game, then shame on you.
Play the game.
You know the game. Get involved. Start playing the game. Oh, I feel like I'm sucking up. Well, then stop complaining when you get passed over for the promotion. Man, I wish more of us just took initiative. You see a problem, fix it. You see an opportunity at work, step in. Somebody asked you to volunteer, step up. Like, this is easy stuff. It's not even hard. The beauty of doing things like this is that you get to be in control of your own life and in the situations that impact you. I had a really good weekend with some friends, and they had just 3 or 4 years ago bought this really nice piece of land on a lake here in Utah, and they built this beautiful home. And I was talking with them as we were celebrating 4th of July with them as a family, and she said that, or I guess my friend said that his wife, as soon as they bought that land, got involved with the HOA, and she now sits on the HOA board.
Yep.
Right. Bingo. Exactly. Because everything that HOA board is deciding is going to impact you personally. And so if you can get involved, get involved. Of course, things are going to work out better in their scenario because she's involved the way that she needs to be involved.
Well, that's another big 5 personality trait, conscientiousness. And so it's like, do you see the opportunity, and are you going to put the things in play to make that happen, right? Because some people are focused on the openness part, which is my ability to create, but then they're also affected by their neuroticism score, which is their propensity for negative emotion. But it's like the one thing that you can really control, because you can't really control whether or not you're creative, whether or not you see the world differently, or whether or not you have a propensity for melancholy, or what we call in modern days depression. But you can control how conscientious you are. You can control when you wake up, you can control when you show up, and you can control what you do and how you perform. Now, there are always going to be politics, and there are some times where you're just going to lose the political game in your office and you may get passed over. But think about it this way. If you walk into your boss's office and you say, hey, I got passed over for another promotion and I don't like it, how do you think they're going to respond to that? They're a manager. They got a bunch of crap that they got to do. And the last thing that they want to do is to add you and your whininess to the end of their to-do list for the week. How about you go in and say something like this? You go, hey, I know that Tom got the promotion this week. I understand that. Tom's a great guy. I probably would have made the same decision. The next time there is a promotion, I would like to be the person that gets that promotion. I would like to continue to develop inside of this organization. I would like to continue to increase my worth, which will obviously be to the redounding benefit of this organization as well. Let's say that were to come up in the next 6 months. What are the things in the next 6 months that I could do to put myself in a great place to be the number one pick for that promotion? Isn't that a lot different than, wah, I didn't get the promotion, give me money? Because again, if I'm paying you $50,000 a year, you at the very minimum need to be bringing me $50,001 worth of value. Otherwise, you don't need to work here anymore. And so you need to look for opportunities to increase your value, not to increase your whininess.
What do you think keeps most men from doing that? Is it fear? Is it just complete unawareness of it? Maybe the mindset of thinking that it's just a series of fortunate events that gets people to some positions. What is it that keeps men from doing that?
It's probably a lot of that. If you were to give them a menu of options, it's probably a little bit of fear. They don't want to go in and have a potentially disputatious conversation with the superior. Maybe they've never heard someone say that before. Maybe they don't read business books or leadership books, or maybe their dad didn't teach them how to negotiate. I think a lot of it, Ryan, is pride. Because it is a whole lot easier to just assume that the world's against you. One of my favorite people on this planet, I swear to God, he thinks the world is completely against him. No matter what happens, he's been dealt a raw hand and a raw deal. Well, guess what? One of the best poker players on the planet is Daniel Negreanu, and that guy can play 2-7 offsuit better than I can play aces because he understands the game. He understands that it's not just the cards that I'm dealt, it's how that I'm playing them. But most guys are just too prideful. They're like, well, it can't be a problem with me. It certainly can't be a me problem. It's that boss that doesn't like me because, I like a different football team. Or it's this manager that just passed me over because they didn't like the joke I told in the break room. It's a lot easier to do that. But if we can be humble and humble ourselves and go into our manager's office with our hands out, not our pockets out, but our hands out to say, I'm ready to receive the wisdom that you have for me. I'm ready to be a better version of what I am now. I want us both to be able to look back, 6 months from now, to look back to this moment and say that I'm certainly a better version of who I was then, and I'm ready to take the next step with this organization. But yeah, it's a whole lot easier to just point your fingers at the rest of the world and complain.
It is interesting because you say, guys might take this personally. It's actually not personal. No, very few people think about you. Kyle, with all due respect, the last time I thought about you was, like when we did our podcast together, right?
Yeah.
And I see some stuff on social media, or I get your emails here and there, and I'm like, oh yeah, cool. But that's it. Yep. And it's not because I don't like you. It's not because I'm not interested in what you have to say. It's not because I don't think you have anything interesting to say. It's because I'm consumed with my own life. So the less that we can take things personally and just realize, hey, that guy's probably not out to get me. In fact, he's pretty neutral towards me and he just wants to win. The more that I can position myself in places that allow me to help that individual win, which just through the nature of congregating and working together will help me inevitably win.
Basically, take care of your own lawn. Most people aren't just overwhelmingly obsessed with whether or not, you get done what you need to get done today. You got to focus on yourself.
Well, and I think that idea is pretty liberating. Once you realize that not everybody is thinking about you, not everybody's out to get you, they don't really care about what you have to say or what you're doing, it allows you to freely express yourself and live the life that you think is important. I think where we run into problems is where we start believing that other people have a vested interest in our lives and they care deeply about what we're doing and what we're saying, where you start to maybe change who you are and start to massage maybe some of your messaging so you don't, upset or offend those people who, you care about.
Well, Ryan, think about it this way. So when I go and speak live, I'm the guy with the mic on his face, right? Up on stage. I'm the only one talking, right? So I'm the most important person in the room, right? No, of course I'm not. Also, I recognize that you are hearing probably about 50% of what I'm saying, and you're going to remember probably less than 2% of what I've said. And so the way I construct my public speeches is I try to put as many hooks in the water as possible, because I have no idea what's going to get your attention, right? I understand primacy and recency. People typically remember the first thing they hear and see and the last thing they hear and see. So I understand that. So I try to start with a bang and end with a bigger bang. But in between, I'm just putting a whole bunch of hooks in the water. And the way that I know that this has been effective is because when people come and talk to me after a speech, they all say something different about the thing that, oh man, when you said that, it really resonated with me. Or, oh, when you brought up this story, like I had never heard it that way before. And so, but again, I can only control me. I am 100% involved in what I'm saying because I'm the one saying it. But you're sitting there and you're like, crap. Did I close the garage on my way here? Shoot, I forgot to set my fantasy football lineup and my kicker's out this week. Like, and you're thinking through all these different scenarios that have nothing to do with what I'm giving you. It's my job to keep you interested. But again, I just have to recognize my job, especially if I'm speaking in front of a men's group at a church or something like that, is to be a reflection of the Father. That if you're looking to me for stuff, that is a problem. Because when we go back to Ezekiel and we go back to the descriptions of Lucifer being cast out of heaven, it's because Lucifer was being looked through as people looked to God, because Lucifer was basically the worship leader in heaven. So he was being looked through as people worship God, and he was tired of being looked through and wanted to be looked to. And so again, it's all about taking the pressure off of us. It's not about us. We're not the point. We're to work as unto the Lord. We're to work our butts off. Christians should be, and conservatives should be the best employees. You should hire as much of them as you want, as there are available to hire. But we have to control ourselves in those circumstances. And if we don't perform, we shouldn't get the job. We shouldn't get the thing. We shouldn't get all of the extra plaudits that we so earnestly seek.
Well, and I don't want to diminish or take away from what you're talking about. I'm Christian as well, but we have a lot of men who aren't believers that way. And what I would tell an individual like that is serve something greater than yourself. Something virtuous, something righteous, something noble. Whether you believe in God or not, like you can do that, right? You can have a standard. You can have something you aspire to be. You can have moral principles. You can have. Now, I believe those are derived from God himself, but if you don't, like there's still an opportunity for you to look outside of yourself and have some sort of standard. I think where we run into problems is we believe we're so individualistic and that we worship ourselves and we think that we are the center of the universe. And that's clearly a problem. Whether you're a believer or not, that is a problem. It's not going to get you anywhere good in life.
Well, Ryan, you use the word standards there. I try to tell people all the time, look, you should have standards, not goals. Because so let's say you set a weight loss goal, right? I want to lose 30 pounds. Well, you get to the goal, and then what typically happens? People start reversing back to the mean, which was who they were 30 pounds ago, right? They don't typically keep going on that journey. That certainly does happen. It's because they set a goal, and once they attain the goal, they're like, well, I attained the goal, so I guess I'll go back to what I was doing before. But if you set a standard, guess what? I didn't have a goal to wake up and work out this morning in my garage gym. You know why? Because I hate it. I hate doing it. I don't want to do it. If I could have all the benefits of powerlifting and jiu-jitsu without actually having to get on the mat and get tortured, or to get under that bar and get tortured, I would take it. But that's not the world we live in. You actually have to do the thing to get the benefits. So I've set a standard that says, when healthy, I will work out. Right? In these different modalities, in these different areas, whether I'm on the road or whether I'm at home. It's a standard. It's a discipline. But we don't focus as much on that. We allow our circumstances to kind of dictate. That's why this fancy watch thing, you can wear this and you can wake up and it'll tell you how good a sleep you got and all those different things. And so for a few weeks there, I was looking at my phone, and let's say I woke up and I felt pretty good. I would look at my phone and it would be like, oh, well, your body battery's only at 40 out of 100. And then I would automatically start feeling bad, right? Like, oh, maybe I don't feel so good. And then the mornings when I felt terrible, I would look at my phone. It's like, oh, body battery's at 95. And I'm like, I should feel better. I'm not going to let a phone, I'm not going to let an app, I'm not going to let a watch dictate whether or not I have a standard or I do the disciplined things that are required of me to get after it today. Imagine looking at your app on your phone to decide whether or not you're going to be loving to your wife today, or whether or not you're going to be helpful to your children or something like that. Oh, well, my body battery, because Garmin says. It's like, get out of here. It's like at the end of the day, you have to set the standard and it's up to you to attain it daily.
Well, the beauty of that is, I'll say it this way. When we have goals, a lot of the times we're unrealistic about what goals that we have. For example, I hear from a lot of guys who want to start organizations like you might have or I have. And, I've often heard people say things like, oh, well, you're just dinking around on Facebook all day. It's like, well, If that's what you think I'm doing, just dinking around on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or wherever we're doing our social media
Just do
thing,
it.
go for it. Go for
Yeah.
it. All the power. I'll help you. I'll tell you what you need to do on Facebook and IG and all these other platforms. But what we have a tendency of doing is overestimating our ability to get to that place a lot quicker than it's actually going to take. And so what ends up happening, at least in my experience and personally, if you have this false expectation of what it's going to take to achieve your goal, you're going to burn up and burn out really, really quickly because you're not going to have that six pack as quickly as you want. You're not going to have the Instagram followers as fast as you'd like. You're not going to have the bank account that you always wished you'd had as soon as you possibly want. It's going to take you a lot longer. But the standard is the standard regardless of the outcome. So you can stick to that, not because there's an outcome, but because it's the right thing to do.
Ryan, I've had a bunch of dudes reach out that are fired up, and boy, they want to start a podcast, and they want my help to start a podcast. The barrier to entry to starting a podcast is pretty low. You could buy a $50 mic and, get a, just use your web camera and stuff like that. And so the barrier to entry is not very high. But when guys ask me for advice on starting a show, I tell them, don't. They're like, wait, I was asking for advice. I'm really ready to do this. I'm like, I don't believe you. And you kind of get into this back and forth, and it's like, look, if you're not willing to look at a blank screen and turn that into an hour's worth of incendiary and, attention-grabbing content a week for years before you make a single cent or have more than 10 followers or listeners that live outside of your household, then don't do it. Because when I started the Undaunted Life, we're well over 600 episodes now. When I started our podcast, Undaunted Life, a Man's Podcast, I was working as unto the Lord. I had written a devotional for the YouVersion Bible app that did astonishingly well in the men's space. I didn't want to write another one, so I was like, I'd rather put, notes on a sheet of paper and then just flow for 30 to 45 minutes. And then it turned into whatever the show has become, right? But for years and years and years, we didn't get a ton of traction. It was little by little by little, and then we've had some huge bumps over the years. But guess what? If my entire focus was getting X number of Instagram followers or X number of monthly donors or X number of listens or downloads or something like that, I would have stopped doing this a long time ago. That wasn't the point as to why I was doing it. And also, guys, just because you're passionate about it doesn't mean that you're going to be successful, right? Sometimes you can be passionate about something that you suck at. I mean, look at back when American Idol was like a big thing. That's why everybody watched those first couple of weeks, because there were people that were passionate about singing, passionate about becoming a pop star, but they didn't have what it took to be that. They didn't have the voice, right? And so just because you're passionate about it doesn't mean that you should do it. Because if your voice isn't unique, and I don't mean your vocal folds, I mean your actual voice in the space isn't unique, then you're just adding noise to a space that already has noise in it. And so if you've got something unique, if you've got a unique perspective or a unique approach or a unique way of doing it, then sure. But there's like 6 million podcasts out there. Like, we don't need another one that's just saying the same stuff, that's repackaged crap that Ryan or I say, right? And so that's the thing that I would just encourage guys to do is like, work is unto the Lord and let the results take care of themselves. And if you don't want to work that hard, then guess what? Don't do it. No one's forcing you. You get an option. You don't have to.
Well, brother, this is fascinating, man. I love talking about this stuff, and I'm glad we could do this. Will you let the guys know who are listening how to connect more with you and learn more about what you're up to?
Absolutely. Our website is undaunted.life, and we are available on all platforms. The biggest thing that we do is the podcast, Undaunted Life, a Man's Podcast. It's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all those other different places. And we're working on a few things behind the scenes with the credit card stuff, but the way that we're able to keep the lights on and keep putting out content is through our monthly donors. And so it's those $10 a month, $50 a month, $100 a month guys. And so if you like content like that, support. Like, if you like Order of Man, you got to buy the hats, you got to buy the t-shirts, you got to go to the events, you got to do all that kind of stuff. Guys, don't take for granted what a little bit can do for the content creators out there. So you're consuming all this stuff for free and all that's great. But if you can do something to support those people that can keep them afloat in a time, when they're in the valley of the shadow of death dealing with credit card nonsense, like, make sure you go and do that. Support guys like Ryan, support stuff like what we're doing at Undaunted Life. We'd love to have you on board.
Brother, we'll sync everything up. I really appreciate your message and your word. It's been invaluable to me. I listen to what you're doing. I listen to your podcasts. I get your stuff, and man, it's instrumental in helping me be on the path that I want to be on as well. So much obliged, much privileged to be able to have this conversation with you.
Thanks again for having me on.